Welcome all to Clear Mountain Monastery's Wednesday evening broadcast. We're beginning at 6 p.m. today. We switched our times to Wednesdays. So this is one of those great moments where Ajahn Kovilo and I get to actually speak for a bit, which I'm very grateful for. And afterwards, we've switched the order of our usual YouTube Q&A and Zoom session. So the Zoom session will be after the Q&A today. So at 6:45, feel free to just go to clearmountainmonastery.org and scroll down to the Zoom session listing. It should be down in the page, and just click on the link and you can join for a more intimate discussion from about 6:45 to 7:30. And I'll let Ajahn Kovilo take it away. Ajahn.
Yeah, it's good to be here for another Wednesday evening. Ajahn Nisabho and I, we actually talk a lot. So it's not like we only talk once a month on these Zoom conversations. We're having conversations about the monastery and just about, just like friends. You know, we're monks, but we're also friends. And that's what is the topic of our conversation today, specifically relating a modern framework for how to relate to your friends and your loved ones, and in a way which is mutually sustainable and mutually appreciable. So the Western framework, which maybe people here will be familiar with, is based on work by an author named Gary Chapman. And his framework is called the 5 Love Languages. In his framework, the 5 love languages are words of affirmation, quality time, giving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. Okay. And it's interesting, the first time I came across this sutta, apparently his first book came out, The 5 Love Languages, in 1992, but I had never heard of it until, say, 2010. Someone was visiting the monastery. It was actually a gentleman who had been training as a monk, but then had left the robes to go pursue a life in the world with romantic relationships and seeing what life was like outside the monastery. And he was the first person to turn me on to this 5 love languages. And when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's fascinating. It really correlates quite well with what's called in Pali Buddhism the sangahavatthu, or the vattu, the basis for sangaha, the basis for fellowship, the basis is for good friendship and getting along. And in the Buddhist context, given in the Buddhist order, you've got generosity, kind speech, beneficial action, and evenness or equanimity. So these really do line up almost one for one with Gary Chapman's list. So his item number 3. Say that again? Except for the last one. Yes, exactly. That's the punchline. Gary kind of threw in this whole. It's a fascinating arena of physical touch, and hopefully Ajahn Nisabho and I will get into maybe why didn't the Buddha put that on the list, or is there a place for physical touch among friends in a Buddhist context? The Gary Chapman's list, his item number 3 is giving gifts, which is the Buddha's 1 of generosity or dana. Words of affirmation are equivalent to what the Buddha called paya vacha, or kindly speech. Paya literally means like sweet or gentle. So words which are just pleasing to the ear. In one discourse, he says that you should interact like milk and water. You should interact with your friends and with the people who you live with as if you blend like milk and water. So milk and water, they come together and they absolutely just totally meld. It's not like oil and water. And you view each other with kindly eyes, as opposed to shooting daggers with your eyes, which is the phrase which the Buddha uses in opposition to this. And Gary Chapman's second item, quality time, somewhat overlaps with the Buddha's third item of attacharya, or beneficial help. And then, so that's, of acts of service. Yeah, acts of service relates to this beneficial help. So that's a bit of an introduction. And then we've got this outlier, which we mentioned, of physical touch. So this set of 4 teachings comes up quite a number of times in the Pali Canon. And we can get into more of where those come up and what the nuances of the different instances are later. But that's just a general introduction. And I've always found this list of 4 to be really, really helpful. The Buddha said that one of the main aids for the spiritual life, or basically just for living the path, for practicing the Eightfold Path, is kalyanamitta, or beautiful friendship, good friendship, spiritual friendship. And it's not the case that you read that, okay, the Buddha praised having good friends, and so I'm going to do that. And then automatically you're just going to be able to get good friends. You really have to put in the effort. One of my family members, who's a bit sarcastic, jokes that, when he first heard that, he first heard about the idea of friends, and he thought, oh, this is a great idea. But then he learned that to have friends, you need to be a friend. And then he thought, oh, it's a bit too much work. So it's kind of his snarky way of talking about friendship. But it really is the case that to have a friend, you have to be in a friend. And I feel like these 4 teachings of the Buddha are a good framework for relating to different people. And as hopefully we'll flesh out, different people have natural affinities to one or other of these 4 Buddhist love languages, these 4 bases of fellowship. And that's kind of Gary Chapman's main thesis, is that some people are giving types, some people are quality time types, some people are gift types, some people are physical touch types. And you have to know what you are. So how do I like to receive love? How do I like to give love? And then how do the people in my life like to give love and receive love? And it's fascinating to think about yourself, to figure out, ask yourself, oh, what's my primary way of showing friendship and affection? And how do I like to receive it in return? So that's a bit of a prolonged introduction. Ajahn Nisabho, do you have any thoughts on this topic in general?
Yeah, thank you, Ajahn. I think we sort of started talking about this when we were listening to various authors talk about the ratio of positive to negative interactions that married couples should have. Anywhere from, I think I heard one ratio was 4 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction. Anywhere below that, the relationship wouldn't work, but also anywhere above the ratio of 11 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction wouldn't work either, because then the 2 people wouldn't be challenging one another. And then Ajahn Kovilo heard a different ratio that put the ideal ballpark maybe more between 11 and 22. Ajahn can flesh that out. But we started to realize that we actually were a bit of acted like a married couple a little bit, and that these teachings were somewhat relevant. So then we, just were talking about that, and this parallel, which I didn't know was so almost perfect in the texts between these languages, with the exception of the 5th and the sangahavatthu, Ajahn Kovilo brought up, and it's such an interesting correspondence. I even, we tried to look up if the author had Buddhist roots. He did, I think, major in religion, so perhaps. But I suppose I was thinking about how each of these different languages manifests in my life as a monk. And what really struck me was, Ajahn, I think one of the first times that you stayed at Abhayagiri when I was there, you mentioned this one quote from a sutta where it says that if a monk wants to be dear and agreeable to his companions, then he should resort to empty huts, which is counterintuitive because you'd think that if you wanted to be agreeable, you'd be consorting and resorting to public spaces and spending time with your companions. But here the Buddha points to this ethic of actually the dynamic as practitioners changes, and what endears you to those with you on the path becomes less how they interact specifically with you or how much they do, and rather their fidelity to the path itself.
Mm.
And it really struck me as true in that even there started to be a strange feeling when I formed sort of intimate one-on-one, not intimate, but really kind of special friendships with certain monks. There's sometimes a certain feeling that it's not totally appropriate that, there's practitioners practicing together, but that personalities shouldn't play a role in the same way, which I think can sound a little dour at first, but I think it's actually very heartening because it means that our relationships, as we grow in practice, become predicated not so much on these shifting personalities that we all have, which can be clumsy and awkward, and your bond or respect or care for another isn't dependent on how well you're getting along at a specific moment, but rather on your steps being parallel on this path. So it's almost as if the central relationship is no longer between two individuals, but rather between each individual and the Dhamma. And the relationship between the two individuals is strong depending on how much in parallel they're walking. And I just have seen that again and again. The monastics that I feel the most, just upwelling of love and faith in are the ones that I see really holding this path with beauty and grace and devotion, even if they're not the ones that I talk to the most easily or that I spend the most time with. I remember, the first time meeting some really amazing practitioner and teachers, and just it felt like falling in love, just with who they were and what they represented. So, anyways, that shift between the central relationship being one between two individuals to somehow the relationship being between each individual and the Dhamma affected how I thought of every one of those four languages. In that, kind words, it's actually a great honor to be admonished by a teacher. You know, as a monk, you get the sort of privilege of being really hit over the head by sort of the fierce teacher role, and I have many times, or getting sometimes the Buddha says the greatest gift is the gift of, or that when someone admonishes you, it's a gift, and because it's like someone's pointing out buried treasure in that you can see a defilement in yourself and uproot it. And it's true, the monk's kind words with a practitioner friend aren't ones that sort of flatter or put salve on a wound, but sometimes it's the ones who actually will tell you really clearly where you're missing the mark. And those are the relationships I value the most. And finally, just, well, anyway, there's more to flesh out with each of those, but I feel like I'd like to let you take a sort of speak a bit, Ajahn, and then I can also speak about what some of those other languages mean to me as a monk.
Yeah, just a quick response. Like as you're talking, I really appreciate you bringing up that discourse. It's from the Akankaya Sutta. If a bhikkhu should wish, or if one should wish, I believe it's Majjhima number 7, perhaps?
6.
6? All right. But basically the Buddha gives 5 rejoinders, and admittedly it is for monks, but he says, if a bhikkhu should wish, may I be dear and agreeable to my friends and companions in the holy life. They should keep their precepts. They should not neglect meditation. They should be devoted to internal serenity of mind. They should be endowed with vipassana, or insight, and they should not neglect empty huts. And it's, in a way, it is kind of a monastic list. But, you know, as you bring up, Ajahn Nisabho, I think there is a place for it. Like, for space and for having seclusion and having one's own space, even within a very intimate, even partnered relationship, even within a marriage. I mean, there was a comedian, I remember, who came up with a quite funny formula. He was talking about just this point about how people, if they aren't able to get a break from their husband or wife, it often just, destroys the relationship. And he came up with the formula that love plus time minus distance equals hate. Yeah. So if you've got your love is easy, but over time, if you don't get some distance from the other person, it's going to create sparks. And I thought that was pretty insightful and also funny when you're at a distance from it. So, but I do think that's worthy of reflecting on, certainly for monks, because I feel the exact same way as you expressed it quite eloquently about, it's, my monk friendships are not about personality. I've got monk friends of all sorts, of all types. And I'm not, the main quality is, their devotion to and love for the Dhamma, really, that kind of attracts me as well. I think you put it quite well. So did you want to share about your thoughts about the individual love languages, either of Gary Chapman or the Buddha?
Sure. I mean, I really like that formula. I think that's quite good. And I mean, it also, the distance, so often say going on retreat or leaving a dinner party early to meditate, or leaving the lay life to run off to Thailand and ordain, it can seem a bit like a zero-sum game for, you're taking care of your own happiness, but you're leaving your friends. But it's not like that. Even for those who don't understand in the moment what you're doing and are annoyed or hurt by it, I think a lot of monks have had this experience where, a lot of people don't understand, but then over the years, something changes, or someone close to them passes away, or they get cancer, or just something shifts, and the spiritual path becomes deeply important. And the fact that they know someone who pursued it and prioritized it becomes hugely significant. And in a sense, it's the biggest gift you could give someone, and it's the best type of friend you could be. So whenever people articulate this idea of, say, going off to, pulling back a bit from certain relationships being, a selfish thing or something like that, I think it's worth reflecting that this is how you best show love for people. I mean, people can find others to go to the movies with or coffee with. It's not a big deal. But for them to find someone who can hold out a path that might help them navigate, you know, these the most intense issues in life. That's a gift, and that's something that is rarely provided. So I think it is one of the best sort of friendships that one can give. And just briefly, I think the endearing speech was one that came up not just in terms of having friends who will tell you the truth and admonish you, but also in terms of, and as monastics, we're required every 2 weeks to kind of confess to one another. But also, there's something about having someone who will speak the Dharma without softening it too much to you. So my parents recently bought a piece of property that they were hoping to provide as a resource and refuge for monastics. And I think there's still some of that core vision there, but this summer fires surrounded it and got within a half mile of totally incinerating it, which didn't stop they still have this vision of putting up some structures there and hosting monastics to an extent, but it definitely put the brakes on a full house. And they were telling Ajahn, one senior monk in our tradition, about this situation, and where so many people would have sort of commiserated and said, how are you? Are you doing okay? How's your heart? Ajahn, this monastic said, you're being taught to let go of these things early. You have to let go of these things no matter what at the end of a life. So this is how we learn earlier to let go, something like that. And that's just that's not the endearing speech you'd expect in a relationship, or that would necessarily go over well in every marriage. but I think the deeper you get in this path, the more you appreciate a gift like that. Every one of these languages changes somewhat, I feel. Except maybe giving and physical touch. Although we do give massages, which is what's speaking to senior monastics, like foot massages. So, Ajahn?
Yeah, no. As you're talking about that, I'm looking. There is a bit of a difference in the language between the 5 love languages of popular culture and the Buddha's sangahavatthu. I mean, the Buddha frames it in terms of peya vacha, or endearing or sweet, maybe more like sweet speech, which is piya, dear speech. Whereas Gary Chapman uses the words of affirmation, which, you're, to some extent, I mean, the Ajahn who is talking to your parents, I mean, that's not really, affirmative words in that situation would be like, to some extent, you could see this word as affirming, as, kind of shying away from, talking about negative aspects of things. But I think there is a deeper meaning in that. And if we were to go deeper into the book, that would probably be fleshed out. But I think that's worth touching on. In terms of physical contact, it's an aspect which most people probably don't know exists in a monastic situation. So we have many rules, as everybody could probably guess. And we have very strict rules around physical contact with a lustful mind, with a member of the opposite sex, the opposite biological sex. And how that translates into physical touch at all, pretty much, although the wording of the rule is to avoid physical touch when there's lust in the mind, it basically manifests both in the perceptions and lived practice of Vinaya observing or rule observing nuns and of monks. So monks, we just won't make intentional physical contact with women, and nuns will not make physical intentional contact with men. And so that's there is, the Buddha did not praise physical touch as the answer for everything. And certainly, as these rules show, there's reason to curb that. But within monasteries, the Buddha did talk about one's duties to one's preceptor or one's teacher or people who are sick. And part of that is massage. So you go to a living Buddhist country like Thailand, and there's these beautiful scenes of late night, young monks, or it doesn't matter the age really, but basically giving, foot massage, or it's something we can do. Yeah, monks, we give up money. We can't really give gifts on a physical level, certainly not a monetary level. We find other ways to give. But this physical contact, there is a place for that. And it's actually a really beautiful spot. So again, this is a very monastic example. And but I think it's worth considering, who and how and in what way do you share physical contact with people? And it can be, such a healing quality, a healing gift, really. And for people who use it wisely, it can really cement these bonds of friendship, even if you don't maybe have so endearing speech or aren't, a giver of many gifts or a doer of service. There are different ways of showing our affection towards others. I think it's good. We've already got a bunch of questions. Nisabho, do you want to go into questions, and maybe we can just have this question on the back of our minds as we go through it, of this question of figuring out what one's primary love language is, what one's primary sangahavatthu is. I think it's a fascinating investigation.
Yeah, and just briefly before we do questions, Ajahn, I just wanted to, I agree, and about figuring out what one's primary love language is, and something about it feels like it becomes more and more important as a monk to figure out what the language of love that you're best at giving is, rather than what you need. And I really see, like, some monastics are just such good givers, and finding out what a senior monastic needs is not easy. They've got pretty much everything. So you really have to be careful. And I know some people will sort of see what supplements they take or what they enjoy, and it's very impressive. And just to also say that in terms of sweet words, I know, Ajahn, when we were living together at the Pacific Hermitage, one of the things I really enjoyed was on alms round, after a period of silence, towards the end of our alms round, or earlier if we both had coffee, we would talk about, Dhamma, and it was so good to sort of speak about these things, because as a monk you can just get in the routine of not talking about the Dhamma a lot. And it really brought to mind a sutta called the Chula Gosinga Sutta, which is where I believe, Ajahn, you were actually referencing some quotes from it, but it's Venerable Anuruddha speaking about living with these other monks and how they give to each other and live more or less in seclusion. But then every 5 days they come together and talk Dhamma. And the thing is, at least in one of these suttas, they're all enlightened, and yet they still gather and just talk about the Dhamma. And when we lived with Ajahn Jayasaro, he had a similar situation where people would live in distant kutis, but then come together every 5 days to speak about the Dhamma. And just to say how sweet that is in a life, and you never outgrow it. I mean, if Arahants can do it, certainly we can. And at the end of that sutta, it's one of the few suttas where the heavens resonate with this rejoicing of the angels all the way up every level. It's this sort of resounding of the world systems happens only a few times in the whole Tripitaka, the whole canon, but this is one of them. So I think it's very significant. This way we bond with one another is something very much singled out. So um, anyways, that's what I was going to say. But Ajahn, I think we could go for questions unless you have something you'd like to speak to as well.
No, let's start looking for some questions. Do you want to highlight them?
Sure. Okay. Hugs can be major in lay life. True.
It's true. I agree.
All right, let's see.
But they can also be oppressive. I mean, not everybody likes hugs. I have family members who say they hate hugs. So yeah, watch out if your major love language is hugging. You might create some enemies.
When Ajahn had a story of, gosh, I don't want to say any names, but another Ajahn coming to the airport and giving one of his good friends a big hug. And then this other Ajahn came up trying to get a hug too, and it didn't go over well. I think the American and the English aesthetics don't completely mix in this respect. So Ajahn, here's the question. After the Karaniya Metta Sutta, what other suttas would you recommend the lay person to study to deepen their Dhamma practice?
Good question. I'll highlight that. I would recommend the Mangala Sutta. So this occurs a number of times in the canon, but if you just search for the Sutta on the highest blessings, it features in the chanting book for the Western Sangha. So there's a standardized version which monks and people around these monasteries are memorizing. So, thus have I heard that the Blessed One was staying at Savatthi in the Jeta's Grove reside, etc. And basically it's a list of some 30 to 40 blessings or mangala, which the Buddha highlights as being basically the best things in life. And it starts out with not hanging out with foolish people and goes all the way up to Nibbana and contains things in there like kindly speech and generosity and humility and talking to people who care about the path and looking after your relatives, etc. So it's a fascinating sutra. It's very, each of these different points is just summarized in a word or two. But yeah, that sutra can just grow with you your whole life. So it's even worth memorizing along with the Metta Sutta. And yeah, that's my recommendation. And really, I mean, a lot of people, that's enough. I mean, not everybody needs to read the whole canon. You know, you can, those two suttas, the Mangala Sutta, well, both of them really, contain a whole swath, a whole spectra of what it means to be practicing. So yeah, good question.
Ajahn, the blurb under the screen lists number 4 as consistency. Ajahn Kovilo mentioned equanimity. Is consistency another translation of equanimity?
Yes, it is. The Pali word is sammanatata, which has a number of different translations, depending on how you derive the etymology. So sama means even, or it means calming. The atta or the ta ending makes it like a stative thing. So like ness. So like it's calmingness, or samana means just evenness or equanimity. Yeah, consistency is one other way that it's translated. I think in Thai texts, and it's possible that the consistency was an English translation based on a Thai translation based on the Pali. So yeah, but I think all of them have different nuances, which are useful to consider.
What came to mind for me with that term, Ajahn, was in the Majjhima Nikaya 48, the principles of harmony. One aspect of right view is, or noble right view, is that one is like a a mother cow, who, while grazing, always keeps an eye on her calf. Even so, though a bhikkhu may attend to his other duties, he always maintains a respect for heightened virtue, a respect for heightened concentration, and a respect for heightened wisdom. I think those three. Tell me if I'm wrong, Ajahn.
I don't remember, but that's a
Okay.
fascinating, it's a great simile. We should look it up.
And I love that aspect of consistency in terms of someone really maintaining their North Star. And because, as monastics, we do have at times busy periods, and at some monasteries, there can be this sort of distinction that rises between work monks and practice monks. And I think, or study monks and work monks, this has been a perennial tension since the time of the Buddha. And just to, you know, the power of seeing someone who, even though they have a great deal going on, doesn't lose sight of what's central, and also gives room and respect for those who are following that. There's this great sutta where there's all these monks in this monastery, and they criticize this young monastic who's just retreating to his hut every day, and they complain to the Buddha about him because he's not helping out. And the Buddha says he's enlightened, and he's going and practicing. And I think they all felt quite embarrassed. So you never know. And sometimes the most important and powerful contribution a monastic can make, or any practitioner can make, is really diving deep into practice. And so somehow that consistency in terms of respect for the Dhamma and keeping that always in mind and having that inform one's relationships. I mean, it's all, speaks to the same aspect, but I thought that was relevant. Jim, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's thinking about these qualities as mature qualities that you want to look for in a friend as well. So if the people around you are fickle, yeah, and uneven and inconsistent with the way that they relate to you, so like as Ajahn Nisabho mentioned, when you leave the party early because you want to meditate or just because you don't want to be there, and there's no aversion, you do it with loving kindness. If your friends are people who will look down on you the next day for stepping out, that's an inconsistent action. It's kind of a fickle relationship to some degree. And yeah, to the extent that we can, it's good to find friends who are more solid than that, who aren't going to judge you for minor actions, and who are solid people. And it's good to notice that in others, not to judge them for it, but just say, oh, this person is inconsistent. Yeah. And if you want your life to be more consistent, then having people around you who are also consistent makes that possible. Yeah. Because they're working kind of in parallel with you. Whereas like people who are just, have no system to their days and no system to their thoughts, and just kind of are haphazard in whatever they do, just kind of jumping from one thing to the next, this kind of desultory attitude. Yeah, maybe it's not going to get you in the direction you want to go. So
That's a good recollection, Ajahn.
I can highlight another question, or do you have one on the burner?
I don't see another one that I found except someone saying that their love language was food. So feel free to highlight something, Ajahn. We have about 2 more minutes. And I'm sorry about the sound. People have been commenting. So.
Oh. Well, this is a comment.
Oh, there's a question. Oh, sorry.
This is one, maybe we found the same one. So a Tibetan Buddhist nun hugged me once when I was going through a hard time in my personal life. I was shocked, but also quite touched. Yeah, I mean, I've seen the Dalai Lama, he does hug people and he does shake people's hands. And yeah, obviously I'm not going to fault the Dalai Lama. He's such a, call it like a brand ambassador, you could say. But yeah, it is kind of shied away from for, rule keeping Theravada monks. But yeah, I'm glad that the nun hugged you, and what do you think, Ajahn Nisabho?
Yeah, I mean, the traditions definitely hold these things a bit differently. So, yeah, we aren't big huggers in the Theravada, um, but it's the Dalai Lama's lovely. So, yes, and just a quick note, Ajahn, is we're coming up on 6:45. So, since we have a Zoom session scheduled right about then, perhaps we should uh, wrap things up. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, it is about time. Maybe there's one.
Any final thoughts on this, Ajahn? Or want to answer the final question?
Let's do one final question, because we have two people asking it. So,
Great.
and I'll let you answer this. So, the question is, how do we enjoy words of affirmation without getting caught in attachment to praise and blame?
I think it can be very helpful to reflect on how the practice of gratitude, because if you really cultivate that attitude of gratitude, then you begin to understand that all these good qualities are coming from others in a certain way, like you're learning from others. Others are giving you pointers on the path. We all learned the Dhamma from someone. Someone taught us these things. And there's in one of the sutras, the Buddha says one thing one should do is speak not in terms of persons, but in terms of states. So one can acknowledge this goodness in oneself, but it doesn't have to be me. And I think that really also that breadth of heart that comes from that space of gratitude somehow lets the ego not crystallize so tightly around every spark of praise. But I think also just feeling the intoxication of it, we all are so hungry for that. And I think we can sympathize. It's so important to feel wanted and valued. But one thing that I ask every evening, and that the Christians say one's guardian angel wants most of all to hear you ask to have your largest faults revealed and to be humbled. So that's a daily practice for me, is asking that I could be humbled and to make myself better in that way. And I think that's a beautiful aspiration always, to be humbled. Richard Rohr says that up until you're 30 or so, you have this measure of success so the ego can kind of get its feet under it. But then after that, everything he's learned has been through failure. And I think there's something to holding life like that and not getting too caught on praise, but seeing failure as a real chance to humble ourselves more and more. So
Beautiful. Let's call it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We're going to be switching over to Zoom